The sound of a gunshot cracked through the dry Montana air as Jasper Blackwell reined his horse to a stop on the ridge overlooking Malad City, Idaho Territory. The year was 1876, and the dust from his 4-day ride still clung to his leather vest and worn denim. The gunshot hadn't been his. It had come from the town below, where a commotion was brewing outside the saloon. Jasper adjusted his hat, his calloused fingers brushing against the scar that ran down his temple to his jaw, a reminder of why he preferred the company of his horse to that of people. He hadn't planned on stopping in Malad City, but his supplies were running low, and both he and his stallion needed rest before continuing north. "Reckon we'll stay just long enough to restock and be on our way," he muttered to his horse, a magnificent chestnut named Rusty. The animal snorted in response, as if agreeing that lingering among people was never a good idea. As Jasper guided Rusty down the dusty path toward town, he couldn't help but notice the unusual activity for a Tuesday afternoon. A crowd had gathered outside the saloon, and the sheriff was attempting to calm what appeared to be an agitated group of men. Tying Rusty to the hitching post outside the general store, Jasper kept his head down. At 32, he had learned the hard way that minding his own business was the surest path to survival in these territories. The scar on his face and the reputation that followed him ensured most folks gave him a wide berth, which suited him just fine. "I don't care what your business is here. You can't be threatening decent folks." The sheriff's voice carried across the street. Jasper's curiosity got the better of him. He glanced toward the commotion while pretending to inspect the notices tacked to the board outside the general store. A young woman with honey-brown hair stood defiantly beside the sheriff, her chin raised despite being surrounded by a group of rough-looking men. "That land belongs to my father, and you know it," she declared, her voice clear and unwavering. "His claim was filed legally before any of yours." One of the men, a burly character with a beard that seemed to have collected several days' worth of tobacco juice, stepped closer to her. "Your pa's dead, lady, and that claim ain't worth the paper it's written on without someone to work it. You'd best sell to us at a fair price before accidents start happening." Jasper tensed, his hand instinctively drifting toward the revolver on his hip. He'd seen this kind of intimidation plenty of times before. Land grabs were common in the territories, especially when someone vulnerable inherited property. The sheriff placed himself between the woman and the men. "That's enough threats for one day, Carson. Miss Abernathy is within her rights to keep her father's property." The woman, Miss Abernathy, didn't flinch. "Thank you, Sheriff, but I can speak for myself." She addressed the men directly. "I have no intention of selling my father's land. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have business to attend to." She turned and walked toward the general store, her back straight, her steps measured. Jasper quickly averted his gaze, pretending to be absorbed in reading a notice about a lost mule. As she approached the store entrance, he couldn't help but admire her composure. The bell above the door jingled as she entered. Jasper waited a moment, then followed. He needed supplies anyway, and the store was the logical place to get them. The interior was cooler than the dusty street, filled with the mingled scents of coffee, leather, and dried herbs. Miss Abernathy was already at the counter, speaking with the storekeeper, a balding man with spectacles perched on his nose. "I'm sorry about your father, Miss Tabitha. He was a good man," the storekeeper was saying. "These supplies ought to last you a spell." "You sure you're going to be all right out there by yourself?" "I'll manage, Mr. Pearson," she replied. "Pa taught me well. Besides, I've hired 2 ranch hands to help with the heavy work. They start tomorrow." Jasper moved quietly through the store, collecting what he needed: coffee, jerky, beans, ammunition. He kept his head down but his ears open. The woman Tabitha Abernathy was clearly determined, but determination alone wouldn't keep those men from coming after her land. He'd seen enough frontier disputes to know how they typically ended. As he approached the counter with his goods, Tabitha turned, noticing him for the first time. Her eyes widened slightly at the sight of his scar, but to her credit, her gaze didn't linger there. Instead, she met his eyes directly. "Afternoon," she said with a nod, stepping aside to make room at the counter. Jasper nodded back but said nothing. Words had never been his strong suit, and he saw no point in small talk. He placed his items on the counter, waiting as Mr. Pearson totaled everything up. "That'll be $2.45, the storekeeper said. As Jasper reached for his money pouch, a commotion outside drew their attention. Through the window, they could see Carson and his men mounting up, but not before the bearded man spat in the direction of the store and made a slashing motion across his throat. Tabitha stiffened beside him but said nothing. "Those men mean business, Miss Abernathy," Mr. Pearson said worriedly. "Maybe you should reconsider selling. Your father wouldn't want you putting yourself in danger." "My father wanted that land to stay in our family," she replied firmly. "He spent 15 years building that ranch. I won't dishonor his memory by giving it up at the first sign of trouble." Jasper paid for his supplies and gathered them into his saddlebags. He should leave town now, get back on the trail before sundown. This wasn't his problem. He had his own troubles, his own destination. But as he stepped outside, he saw Carson and his men ride past, one of them calling out, "We'll be seeing you real soon, Miss Abernathy," followed by mocking laughter that set Jasper's teeth on edge. He stood by Rusty, tying his supplies to the saddle, when the store door opened behind him, and Tabitha Abernathy emerged with her own purchases. "Miss Abernathy," he found himself saying, his voice rough from disuse, "those men aren't just making idle threats." She paused, studying him with clear hazel eyes. "I'm aware, Mr. Blackwell, Jasper Blackwell." "Well, Mr. Blackwell, I appreciate your concern, but I've been dealing with men like them all my life." Jasper frowned. "Not like Carson, you haven't. I know his type. They don't stop until they get what they want." She lifted her chin in that determined way he'd already recognized. "Then they'll be disappointed. I'm not giving up my father's land." As she loaded her supplies into a small wagon parked nearby, Jasper found himself torn. The smart move would be to mount up and ride out, continue north as planned. But something about Tabitha Abernathy's situation nagged at him. Maybe it was the echo of his own past, the memory of what happened when good people stood alone against predators like Carson. "How far is your ranch?" he asked abruptly. She looked up, surprised. "About 5 miles west of town." "Why?" Jasper hesitated. What was he doing? Getting involved in other people's problems had only ever brought him grief, and yet— "Those 2 hands you hired, they at the ranch now?" "No," she admitted. "They arrive tomorrow, supposedly." "Why are you asking?" Jasper adjusted his hat. "Because Carson and his men won't wait until tomorrow. They made their intentions clear enough." Tabitha's expression hardened. "Are you suggesting I can't defend myself, Mr. Blackwell?" "I'm suggesting that one person against 5 or 6 isn't good odds, regardless of how capable that person might be." She considered this, then sighed. "And what do you propose? That I hide in town until my hired help arrives?" "I propose you let me ride along to your ranch, make sure you get there safely." The words were out of his mouth before he could reconsider. "Just until your hands arrive tomorrow." Tabitha studied him skeptically. "And why would you do that? You don't know me." Jasper shifted uncomfortably. "Let's just say I've seen what happens when folks like Carson decide to take what isn't theirs. Besides," he added, "I could use a place to rest for the night before continuing north." She seemed to weigh his offer, her gaze assessing. Finally, she nodded. "All right, Mr. Blackwell. You can follow me back to the Abernathy ranch. But I warn you I'm a good shot, and I sleep with a shotgun beside my bed." For the first time in a long while, Jasper felt the corner of his mouth twitch in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Wouldn't expect anything less, Miss Abernathy." As they left Malad City behind them, Jasper riding alongside Tabitha's wagon, he wondered what he'd gotten himself into. He'd spent years avoiding entanglements, keeping to himself, building walls that no one could breach. And yet, here he was, escorting a stubborn woman back to a ranch that was clearly in the crosshairs of dangerous men. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the rolling landscape as they traveled west. Tabitha handled the wagon with practiced ease, her posture relaxed but vigilant. Occasionally, Jasper would catch her glancing his way, studying him when she thought he wasn't looking. "You're not from around here," she finally said, breaking the silence that had stretched between them. "No," Jasper replied simply. "Where are you headed?" "Montana Territory." She waited for him to elaborate, and when he didn't, she pressed, "What's in Montana?" Jasper's jaw tightened. "A fresh start." Tabitha seemed to sense his reluctance and changed tack. "My father came here in '61, right after my mother died. I was just 7 years old. He built our ranch from nothing, just a claim slip and determination." She glanced at the rolling hills ahead. "I grew up on that land, it's all I have left of him now." Despite himself, Jasper asked, "What happened to him?" Her hands tightened on the reins. "Fever took him 3 weeks ago." It happened so fast. By the time the doctor from town arrived, it was too late. She cleared her throat. "The day after we buried him, Carson and his men showed up talking about buying the land. When I refused, they started making threats." "Land with water rights," Jasper guessed. She nodded. "Creek runs right through our property. In these parts, that's more valuable than gold." As they crested a hill, Tabitha pointed ahead. "There it is, Abernathy Ranch." Below them sprawled a modest but well-maintained property. A sturdy log cabin sat at the center, with a barn, corral, and several outbuildings nearby. The creek she'd mentioned glinted in the late afternoon sun, cutting through pastureland where a small herd of cattle grazed. "Your father built all this?" Jasper asked, genuinely impressed. "With these 2 hands," she said, pride evident in her voice. "And mine, once they were big enough to hold a hammer." As they approached the ranch, Jasper felt a prickle of unease. He scanned the property carefully, noting how exposed it was from several directions. Defensively, it left much to be desired. They just reached the main yard when Rusty suddenly tossed his head, ears pricking forward. Jasper raised his hand, signaling Tabitha to stop the wagon. "What is it?" she whispered. Jasper's eyes narrowed. "Someone's been here." He dismounted, drawing his revolver. Fresh hoofprints marked the dirt around the cabin, too many for just one rider. Moving cautiously, he approached the front door, which stood slightly ajar. "Stay here," he told Tabitha, but she was already climbing down from the wagon, a rifle in her hands. "It's my home," she said firmly. "I'm coming with you." Jasper wanted to argue but recognized the determination in her eyes. With a curt nod, he pushed the door open with his boot, gun at the ready. The interior of the cabin had been ransacked. Furniture overturned, cupboards emptied, belongings strewn across the floor. Tabitha gasped behind him, pushing past to survey the damage. "They were looking for something," Jasper observed, noting the methodical nature of the search. Tabitha hurried to a small writing desk in the corner, which had been broken open, its contents scattered. "The deed," she said, frantically sorting through papers. "The land deed and water rights." "Did they find it?" She continued searching, then let out a relieved breath. "No. Pa had a hiding place." She knelt and pressed a section of floorboard which popped up to reveal a small compartment. From it, she withdrew a leather pouch. "It's still here." Jasper moved to the window, scanning the property. "We should check the barn and outbuildings, make sure they didn't do any other damage. Then we need to secure this place for the night. They might come back." Tabitha nodded, tucking the pouch into her skirt pocket. "I'll check on the livestock." Together they explored the rest of the property. The barn had been searched as well, but the animals were unharmed, a small mercy. The windmill had been tampered with, however, and no longer pumped water to the horse trough. "I can fix that," Jasper said, examining the mechanism. "But not before dark. It'll have to wait till morning." As the sun began to set, they returned to the cabin. Tabitha set about cleaning up the mess while Jasper brought in firewood and helped right the overturned furniture. He kept his gun within reach at all times, his senses alert for any sign of Carson's return. "Are you hungry?" Tabitha asked as she stoked the fire in the cook stove. "Least I can do is offer you a hot meal for your trouble." "You don't owe me anything," Jasper replied, but his stomach rumbled at the mention of food. She almost smiled. "I'll take that as a yes." As she prepared a simple meal of beans, bacon, and cornbread, Jasper positioned himself by the window, watching the approach to the ranch as darkness fell. The silence between them was not uncomfortable, each occupied with their own thoughts. "You're good at this," Tabitha observed as they ate at the kitchen table. "Keeping watch, like you've done it before." Jasper didn't answer immediately, focusing on his food. Finally, he said, "I was a scout during the war. Old habits die hard." "Union," he nodded once. "My father, too," she said, "came west after, like so many others." Jasper set down his fork. "Miss Abernathy, Tabitha," she corrected. "If you're going to help defend my home, you might as well use my name." "Tabitha, then. You need to understand what you're up against. Men like Carson don't play by any rules. If they want your land badly enough, they'll do whatever it takes to get it." She met his gaze steadily. "I understand that better than you might think, Mr. Blackwell." "Jasper," he said, returning her earlier correction. "Jasper." She tested the name, and he found he didn't mind the sound of it on her lips. "I'm not naive. I know what those men are capable of. But this land is all I have. All I am. Won't give it up." He studied her face in the lamplight. She couldn't be more than 25, with a dusting of freckles across her nose and a stubborn set to her jaw that reminded him of someone long ago. Someone he'd failed to protect. "Your hired hands," he said abruptly. "You trust them?" She hesitated. "They came recommended by the livery owner in town. I haven't met them yet. And they know how to handle themselves in a fight. I didn't ask," she frowned. "I hired them to help with the ranch work, not to be gunmen." Jasper sighed. "You might need both." After dinner, they secured the cabin as best they could. Jasper helped Tabitha push a heavy dresser in front of the back door and checked that all the windows could be quickly barricaded if necessary. "I'll take first watch," he said as she prepared for bed. "You get some sleep." She paused, clearly conflicted. "You don't have to do this, you know. This isn't your fight." Jasper looked away. "Get some rest, Tabitha. Dawn comes early." She disappeared behind a curtain that separated her sleeping area from the main room. Jasper positioned himself by the window, rifle across his lap. The night was quiet, with only the occasional distant howl of a coyote to break the silence. He wasn't sure what had possessed him to get involved in Tabitha Abernathy's problems. For years, he'd been careful to avoid anything resembling attachment or responsibility for others. After what happened in Wyoming, Jasper pushed the memory away. That was then. This was now. One night, he reminded himself, just until her hired hands arrived. Then he'd be on his way to Montana, leaving Tabitha Abernathy and her troubles behind. But as he listened to her soft breathing from behind the curtain, Jasper couldn't shake the feeling that it wouldn't be that simple. Nothing ever was. The night passed without incident, though Jasper remained vigilant, allowing himself only brief moments of rest. When dawn broke, painting the eastern sky in hues of pink and gold, he was already outside examining the windmill. The damage wasn't severe. Someone had simply disconnected several crucial components. With methodical precision, he began to repair it. "You're up early," Tabitha's voice came from behind him. She stood with 2 steaming mugs in hand, offering one to him. Jasper accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. Wanted to get this fixed before the day got too hot. She watched him work for a moment, sipping her own coffee. She'd dressed in practical work clothes, a simple shirt and sturdy skirt, with her hair pulled back in a no-nonsense braid. Even so, the morning light caught the honey highlights in her hair, making them gleam. "Your hired hands," Jasper said, refocusing on the task at hand. "When do you expect them? Mr. Peterson at the livery said they'd be here by midday." She glanced toward the road leading to town. "I hope they're reliable. There's a lot of work to be done." Jasper grunted in agreement, tightening a bolt on the windmill. "I'll get this running, then check your fence lines. Might give us a better idea of what Carson's after." "You don't have to do that," Tabitha protested. "You've already done more than enough." He paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "I said I'd stay until your hands arrive. Might as well make myself useful." She studied him curiously. "Why are you really helping me, Jasper? You're clearly a man in a hurry to get somewhere." The question caught him off guard. Why was he helping her? The smart move would have been to ride on, forget Tabitha Abernathy and her troubles. But something about her situation, her determination, her vulnerability beneath that tough exterior had struck a chord in him that he'd thought long silenced. "Let's just say I've seen what happens when good people face bad odds alone," he finally said. "Montana can wait another day." She seemed to accept this, though her eyes told him she suspected there was more to it. "Well, I'm grateful, regardless of your reasons." By mid-morning, Jasper had the windmill working again, water flowing into the trough where Tabitha's horses drank eagerly. He saddled Rusty and rode the perimeter of the property, checking fences and getting a feel for the lay of the land. The creek Tabitha had mentioned ran through the western portion of the ranch, a clear, steady stream that would be invaluable in the dry months. He was examining a section of fence that appeared recently cut when he spotted riders approaching from the east, 3 men, moving at a steady pace toward the ranch house. Jasper spurred Rusty into a gallop, taking a shortcut across the pasture to intercept them. As he drew closer, he recognized Carson's bulky form in the lead. Keeping his hand near his revolver, Jasper positioned himself between the riders and the path to the ranch house. Carson reined in his horse, a smirk spreading across his bearded face. "Well, well, what have we here?" "Miss Abernathy's got herself a watchdog." The 2 men with him, younger, with the hard eyes of hired guns spread out slightly, their posture alert and ready. "You're trespassing," Jasper said evenly. "Turn around and head back the way you came." Carson chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "That's mighty brave talk from a man who's outnumbered. I just came to have a friendly chat with Miss Abernathy about her father's property. After ransacking her home, doesn't seem too friendly to me." Carson's eyes narrowed. "Don't know what you're talking about, stranger. But I do know this land will be mine one way or another." He leaned forward in his saddle. "Miss Abernathy would be smart to sell now, while the offer's still generous. Accidents happen out here all the time. Shame for a pretty young woman to meet with misfortune." Jasper's hand drifted closer to his gun. That sounded an awful lot like a threat. "Just stating facts," Carson replied smoothly. "Now, why don't you step aside and let me speak with the lady herself?" She's not interested in selling. You got your answer yesterday. One of Carson's men shifted impatiently. Let's just run this fool off and be done with it, boss. Carson held up a hand. No need for that. Yet. His gaze returned to Jasper. I don't know who you are, mister, but you'd be wise to stay out of business that doesn't concern you. Miss Abernathy's alone out here. No law to speak of. Lots of things could happen. She's not alone, Jasper replied coldly, and I wouldn't test that theory if I were you. Carson studied him for a long moment, then apparently decided that a confrontation wasn't worth the risk, at least not today. Have it your way. But tell Miss Abernathy my offer stands until sundown tomorrow. After that. He shrugged suggestively. Jasper remained motionless as the three men wheeled their horses around and rode away. Only when they were small dots on the horizon did he relax slightly and head back to the ranch house. Tabitha was on the porch, rifle in hand, clearly having witnessed the confrontation from a distance. What did they want? She asked as he dismounted. What they always want. Your land. Jasper looped Rusty's reins around the hitching post. Carson says his offer stands until sundown tomorrow. After that, I suspect he'll try other methods of persuasion. Tabitha's grip on the rifle tightened. I'll never sell to him. Never. Jasper studied her determined face. He mentioned accidents, said you're alone out here with no law to protect you. I'm not alone, she replied, echoing his earlier words to Carson. At least not today. The moment stretched between them, filled with something Jasper couldn't or wouldn't name. He broke the silence first, looking away. Your hired hands should be here soon. Once they arrive, I'll be on my way. Of course, Tabitha said, her expression unreadable. You've done more than enough already. But as the sun climbed higher and midday came and went with no sign of the promised ranch hands, Jasper grew increasingly uneasy. These men Peterson recommended, what do you know about them? Tabitha shook her head, looking worried. Not much. Their names are Miller and Davies. Peterson said they'd worked a cattle drive up from Texas and were looking for steady employment. Jasper frowned. And Peterson is friendly with Carson. I don't know. I've never paid much attention to who associates with whom in town. Her eyes widened as she grasped his implication. You think Peterson might have deliberately sent men who won't show up? To leave me vulnerable, it's possible, Jasper admitted. Carson seems to have friends all over. Tabitha paced the porch, agitated. If you're right, I can't count on any help from town. And I can't run this place alone, not with Carson and his men threatening me. Jasper knew he should leave. Montana was waiting. His new life was waiting. But the thought of riding away, leaving Tabitha to face Carson and his threats alone, sat like a stone in his gut. I could stay another day, he found himself saying. Help you secure the place better. She looked at him, surprise and something like hope flickering in her eyes. You do that. But what about your fresh start in Montana? It'll wait, he said simply. Besides, I've got a score to settle with Carson now. Man like that needs to be taught some manners. Tabitha's face broke into the first genuine smile he'd seen from her, transforming her features from merely pretty to radiant. Thank you, Jasper. I don't know what else to say. Jasper felt an unfamiliar warmth in his chest at her smile, but quickly tamped it down. Don't thank me yet. We've still got Carson to deal with. As afternoon wore on into evening with no sign of Miller and Davies, they both accepted that the hired hands weren't coming. Jasper helped Tabitha tend to the livestock, impressed by her knowledge and capability around the ranch. She clearly knew what she was doing, moving with the confidence of someone who had grown up with the rhythms and demands of ranch life. After dinner, they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Jasper cleaned his revolver while Tabitha mended a tear in one of her work shirts. the silence between them comfortable. "How'd you get that scar?" she asked suddenly, nodding toward his face, Jasper's hand stilled on his gun. Few people dared to ask him directly about the jagged mark that ran from his temple to his jaw. "You don't have to tell me," Tabitha added quickly. "It's just bar fight," he said curtly. 5 years ago in Wyoming." She waited, and something about the twilight and her patient silence loosened his tongue. "I was working as a marshal in a small town called Red Rock. There was a local rancher, powerful man named Hargrove. Had most of the county in his pocket, including half the town council." Jasper reassembled his gun with practiced efficiency. He wanted a widow's land good water access like yours. When she wouldn't sell, things got ugly. Tabitha set aside her mending. "What happened?" Jasper's jaw tightened. "Hargrove's men terrorized her, killed her livestock, poisoned her well. I did what I could to protect her, but I was just one man against many. One night, I was in the saloon when I overheard Hargrove's foreman talking about how they were going to burn the widow out that night." The memory was still vivid, the smoky saloon, the laughter of Hargrove's men as they discussed what amounted to murder so casually, the rage that had overtaken him. "I confronted them," Jasper continued, his voice flat. "It didn't go well. One of them pulled a knife, left me with this." He gestured to his scar. "But I managed to warn the widow. She escaped before they torched her cabin." "You saved her life," Tabitha observed. "Maybe, but I failed to protect her home, her livelihood, and afterward Hargrove had me run out of town. Claimed I started the fight, that I was drunk and unfit to wear the badge." His lips twisted in a mirthless smile. "Not hard to convince people when you've got the mayor and judge in your pocket." Tabitha was quiet for a moment. "Is that why you're heading to Montana?" "To start over where no one knows your name or that scar," Jasper nodded once. "Heard there's a need for experienced lawmen in the mining towns up north. Thought I might try again. Do better this time." "Seems to me you did the best you could in an impossible situation," Tabitha said softly. "One man can't stand against an army." "Maybe not," Jasper agreed, holstering his revolver. "But I aim to try again with Carson. He's cut from the same cloth as Hargrove." Tabitha studied him in the fading light. "You know, most men would have ridden on, not gotten involved in someone else's fight." "I'm not most men," Jasper replied simply. "No," she agreed. "You're certainly not." Something in her tone made him look up, meeting her gaze. The last rays of sunlight caught in her hazel eyes, giving them a golden glow. For a moment neither spoke, the air between them charged with something Jasper hadn't felt in a very long time. He broke the connection first, standing abruptly. "We should turn in. Tomorrow will be a long day." Tabitha nodded, rising as well. "You take the bed tonight." "You've earned it, and I know you barely slept last night. I'll sleep out here," he insisted. "Need to keep watch anyway." She looked like she wanted to argue but relented. "At least take the quilt. Nights get cold even in summer." Inside, she fetched a colorful quilt from her bedroom, handing it to him with a small smile. "My mother made this. It's one of the few things I have of hers." Jasper accepted it carefully. "I'll take good care of it." "I know you will," she said softly. "Good night, Jasper. Good night, Tabitha." As she disappeared behind her curtain, Jasper settled into the chair by the window, quilt across his lap. The night stretched ahead, long and quiet, but his mind was anything but peaceful. Tabitha Abernathy had gotten under his skin somehow, awakening feelings he'd long since buried. And that was dangerous for both of them. Tomorrow, he promised himself. Tomorrow he'd help her devise a plan for dealing with Carson, and then he'd be on his way. No matter what unfamiliar pull he felt toward her, Montana was waiting. A new start was waiting. And getting entangled with a stubborn, beautiful woman, and her land dispute, would only lead to more heartache for one of them, or both. But as he sat in the darkened cabin, listening to Tabitha's soft breathing from the other room, Jasper Blackwell wondered if it was already too late for such rational thinking. The morning brought with it a sense of unease. Jasper woke before dawn, having dozed fitfully in the chair by the window. He moved quietly through the cabin, starting the coffee and stepping outside to check the property in the growing light. Everything seemed peaceful enough. The horses nickered softly in their paddock, and the cattle grazed in the distance. But Jasper couldn't shake the feeling that today would bring trouble. Carson's deadline sundown loomed large in his mind. When Tabitha emerged from her room, dressed in work clothes with her hair neatly braided, she found Jasper at the table, cleaning his rifle. "I've been thinking," he said without preamble. "Carson will make his move today, likely close to his deadline. He'll want to intimidate you one last time before showing his true colors." Tabitha poured herself coffee, her movements steady despite the tension in her shoulders. "I won't be intimidated, I know, but we need a plan." Jasper laid out his rifle, satisfied with its condition. "If Carson is like other land grabbers I've known, he'll come with his men just before sundown, thinking to catch you alone and frightened. What do you suggest?" Jasper considered for a moment. "We prepare, set up defensible positions, make this place as secure as we can." Tabitha nodded, determination hardening her features. "Tell me what to do." They spent the morning fortifying the ranch as best they could. Jasper showed Tabitha how to create defensive positions around the property, places where they could take cover if shooting started. They moved hay bales to strategic locations, reinforced the barn door, and made sure all the livestock was secured in the far pasture, away from the likely approach. "You're good at this," Tabitha observed as they worked, "planning defenses, thinking like your enemy." "Had practice," Jasper replied shortly. He didn't mention the war or the years afterward when he'd worn a badge. Some memories were best left undisturbed. By midday, they had done all they could to prepare. Jasper insisted that Tabitha practice with her rifle and revolver, making sure she could reload quickly and shoot accurately. She was a better shot than he'd expected, hitting the targets he set up with consistent precision. "My father taught me," she explained after emptying her rifle into a row of tin cans, knocking each one from its perch. "Said a woman alone on the frontier needed to know how to protect herself." "Your father was a wise man," Jasper replied, impressed. As afternoon wore on, they ate a simple meal together at the kitchen table. Jasper found himself studying Tabitha when she wasn't looking, the determined set of her jaw, the grace with which she moved, the intelligence in her hazel eyes. In just 2 days, he'd come to respect her tremendously. And something more, something he wasn't ready to examine too closely. "What will you do after this?" she asked suddenly, breaking into his thoughts. "After Carson, I mean, will you still go to Montana?" Jasper hesitated. Until that moment, he hadn't questioned his plans. Montana had been his goal for months, a place to start over, away from his reputation and the ghosts that haunted him. "Yes," he said finally. "I have a job waiting in a mining town called Helena. Friend of mine is sheriff there, said he could use a deputy with experience." Tabitha nodded, her expression carefully neutral. "That sounds like a good opportunity." "It is," Jasper agreed, though the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. She began to clear the dishes, her back to him. "I'll be all right, you know. Once Carson is dealt with, I can run this place. My father made sure I knew how." "I don't doubt it," Jasper said, watching her move around the kitchen. "But running a ranch alone is hard work, even without men like Carson causing trouble." "I'll manage," she said firmly. "I always have." The conversation was interrupted by the distant sound of hoofbeats, multiple horses approaching from the direction of town. Jasper was on his feet instantly, moving to the window. "They're coming earlier than I expected," he muttered, counting at least 6 riders. Carson's brought more men this time. Tabitha joined him at the window, her face set in determined lines. "Let them come. This is my land, and I'm not giving it up without a fight." Jasper turned to her, suddenly gripped by an urgent need to make her understand the danger. "Tabitha, listen to me. These men don't play fair. If shooting starts, you stay down and you stay covered. Promise me." She met his gaze steadily. "I won't hide while you fight my battles, Jasper. I'm not asking you to hide, I'm asking you to be smart." He gripped her shoulders lightly. "We stick to the plan. Take positions, use cover, and don't take unnecessary risks." After a moment, she nodded. "All right. The plan." Jasper released her, acutely aware of how close they'd been standing. "I'll be at the windmill. You take the barn as we discussed. Don't show yourself unless absolutely necessary." As the riders drew closer, Jasper and Tabitha moved to their designated positions. From his vantage point behind the windmill's base, Jasper had a clear view of the approaching party. Carson rode in front, with 5 men fanned out behind him. All were armed, their intentions clear in their posture and expressions. Carson reined in his horse about 50 yards from the house, surveying the quiet ranch. "Miss Abernathy," he called out, "I've come to discuss business." Silence greeted his announcement. Jasper remained still, waiting. Let Carson make the first move. "I know you're in there, Miss Abernathy," Carson continued, his voice hardening. "My offer stands until sundown, which by my watch is about an hour from now. After that, well," he chuckled, the sound carrying across the yard. "After that, I can't guarantee the safety of your property, or yourself." From the corner of his eye, Jasper saw movement at the barn. Tabitha, shifting position for a better view. He silently willed her to remain hidden. "Carson," Jasper called out, drawing the man's attention to the windmill. "Miss Abernathy's not interested in your offer. I suggest you and your men leave while you still can." Carson turned in his saddle, eyes narrowing as he spotted Jasper. "Well, look who's still hanging around. Thought you might have had the good sense to move on, stranger." His gaze swept the property. "Just the 2 of you, is it? Against all of us? Those aren't favorable odds." "I've faced worse," Jasper replied calmly. One of Carson's men leaned over to whisper something, and Carson's expression changed, a flicker of recognition crossing his features. "Wait a minute, I know who you are. You're Jasper Blackwell, the marshal who got run out of Wyoming for starting a brawl and letting a widow's place burn down." Jasper's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "That's not exactly how it happened," Carson laughed. "Doesn't matter how it happened. What matters is you've got no badge, no authority, and no business interfering with my affairs." He raised his voice. "You hear that, Miss Abernathy? Your protector is nothing but a disgraced lawman with a bad reputation. Is that who you're trusting to save your precious ranch?" Jasper's hand drifted toward his revolver. "Last warning, Carson. Take your men and leave." "Or what? You'll shoot us all," Carson smirked. "Even if you're as good as they say, you can't take all of us, and once you're dead, Miss Abernathy will be all alone." "I think she'll find my offer more reasonable then." The tension in the air was palpable. Jasper calculated his odds 6 against 1 or 2 if Tabitha joined the fight. Not good, but he'd survived worse. Before he could respond, Tabitha's voice rang out from the barn. "I can speak for myself, Mr. Carson." Jasper inwardly cursed as she stepped into view, rifle held confidently in her hands. She'd abandoned their plan, but he had to admit she made an impressive sight back straight, chin raised, every inch the determined landowner defending her property. "My answer remains the same," she continued. "This land is not for sale. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever." Carson's face darkened. You're making a mistake, Miss Abernathy, a very dangerous mistake. The only mistake would be giving in to threats from men like you, she replied evenly. Now get off my property. For a tense moment, no one moved. Jasper kept his hand near his gun, calculating which of Carson's men would be the first to draw if shooting started. Then Carson smiled, a cold, calculating expression that set Jasper's nerves on edge. Very well, Miss Abernathy. You've made your position clear. He turned his horse. Boys, let's ride. The lady's made her choice. Jasper didn't relax as the men wheeled their horses around. Something about Carson's easy capitulation felt wrong. The man had been too confident, too certain of his advantage to simply give up. As Carson reached the edge of the yard, he turned back. Oh, and Miss Abernathy, might want to check your water source tomorrow. Creek like that can get contaminated so easily. Cattle dying of thirst is a terrible thing to see. With that parting threat, he spurred his horse forward, his men following. Jasper waited until they were well out of sight before emerging from his position. Tabitha was already striding toward him, her face flushed with anger. He's going to poison my creek, she said furiously. Just like that rancher did to your widow's well, Jasper nodded grimly. That would be my guess. It's a common tactic: destroy what makes the land valuable, then offer to buy it for a fraction of its worth. We have to stop him. Tabitha paced, agitated. If he poisons the creek, it won't just kill my cattle. It could contaminate the water for miles downstream. Jasper considered their options. Carson will move quickly. He knows we'll be expecting something after his threat. I'd wager he's planning to do it tonight under cover of darkness. Then we need to be ready for him. Tabitha checked her rifle. I won't let him destroy everything my father built. As they prepared for the night ahead, Jasper couldn't help but admire Tabitha's determination. Many would have given up by now, accepted Carson's offer as the safest option. But she stood her ground, prepared to fight for what was hers. It reminded him of why he'd become a lawman in the first place, to protect people like her, people who deserved justice. They ate a quick dinner as twilight deepened into night. Afterward, Jasper checked and rechecked their weapons while Tabitha gathered supplies they might need: bandages, water, extra ammunition. We should head to the creek, Jasper said as full darkness settled over the ranch. Find a good position and wait. Carson won't waste time. Tabitha nodded, pulling on a dark jacket. I know a spot where we can see the main crossing point without being seen. It's where anyone would logically access the creek from the road. They moved silently through the darkness, guided by Tabitha's intimate knowledge of the land. The creek gurgled softly nearby, a soothing sound that belied the danger it faced. Tabitha led Jasper to a small rise overlooking the crossing, sheltered by a stand of cottonwood trees that would hide them from view. Here, she whispered, crouching down. We can see in both directions from this position. Jasper settled beside her, his rifle across his knees. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. A quarter moon provided just enough light to see by without revealing their position. They waited in comfortable silence, alert for any sign of movement. Jasper found himself acutely aware of Tabitha beside him, the subtle scent of lavender soap that clung to her hair, the steady rhythm of her breathing, the quiet competence with which she held her rifle. Can I ask you something? Tabitha whispered, keeping her eyes on the creek. Depends on the question, Jasper replied, his gaze similarly fixed on their surroundings. After what happened in Wyoming, why did you keep going? Why not just give up, find an easier life? The question caught him off guard. It was something he'd asked himself many times during the dark months after Red Rock, when he drifted from town to town, taking whatever work he could find. Because giving up would mean men like Hargrove, men like Carson win. he said finally. "And I've seen what happens when they win. Ordinary people suffer, people who can't fight back." He shifted slightly, adjusting his position. "Someone has to stand for what's right, even when it's hard, even when you lose sometimes." Tabitha was quiet for a moment. "That's why I can't sell this land. It's not just about property or money. It's about standing firm against people who think they can take whatever they want, hurt whoever gets in their way." Jasper glanced at her profile, outlined in moonlight. "Your father would be proud." She turned to meet his gaze, her eyes reflecting starlight. "I think he would have liked you, Jasper Blackwell." Something shifted between them in that moment, a connection that ran deeper than their shared predicament. Jasper found himself wanting to reach out, to brush a strand of hair from her face, to close the small distance between them. The sound of distant hoofbeats shattered the moment. Jasper tensed, gesturing for Tabitha to stay low. They watched as 3 riders approached the creek from the north, moving cautiously in the moonlight. Even in the dim light, Jasper recognized Carson's bulky form leading the way. The other 2 men carried something across their saddles, large sacks that could only contain whatever poison they planned to dump into the creek. "They're going to do it upstream," Tabitha whispered, her voice tight with anger, "where it will flow down through the entire property." Jasper nodded, already calculating their move. "We need to stop them before they open those sacks. Once that poison hits the water, it's too late." Carson and his men dismounted about 100 yards upstream, tethering their horses to a tree. They moved to the water's edge, speaking in low voices that didn't carry to where Jasper and Tabitha hid. "Follow my lead," Jasper whispered, rising to a crouch. "Stay behind me, and if shooting starts, get to cover immediately." Tabitha nodded, her expression resolute. They moved silently through the darkness, using the trees and underbrush for cover as they approached Carson's position. When they were within 30 yards, Jasper halted, raising his rifle. "That's far enough, Carson," he called out, his voice cutting through the night. The 3 men spun around, hands reaching for their guns. Carson recovered first, peering into the darkness. "Blackwell, should have known you'd be lurking about. Step away from the creek," Jasper ordered, "and leave those sacks where they are." Carson chuckled, though there was no humor in the sound. "And if we don't, you going to shoot all of us, Blackwell, in the dark, even you're not that good." "Maybe not," Jasper agreed, "but I only need to hit one of you, and I'll make sure it's you, Carson." Beside him, Tabitha raised her own rifle, her aim steady. "And I'll take one of your friends. That leaves just 1 man standing with poor odds." The standoff stretched taut, the only sound the soft burble of the creek and the occasional snort from the tethered horses. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," Carson said finally. "All the lady has to do is sell, fair price. Everyone walks away happy." "Except me," Tabitha replied coldly. "This is my home, my livelihood. I'm not selling." Carson's patience visibly thinned. "Look around you, Miss Abernathy. It's just you and a washed-up lawman with a bad reputation. How long do you think you can hold out? A week? A month? I can keep coming back, keep making life difficult. Eventually, you'll give in. Everyone does." "Not everyone," Jasper said quietly. "Some people stand their ground no matter what. Miss Abernathy is one of those people, and as long as I'm here, she won't stand alone." Something in his tone must have finally convinced Carson of his seriousness. The man's posture changed, tension radiating from him like heat. "This isn't over," he growled. "Not by a long shot." "It's over tonight," Jasper replied firmly. "Now move away from the creek. Leave the sacks where they are." Slowly, reluctantly, Carson and his men stepped back from the water's edge. Jasper advanced cautiously, keeping his rifle trained on Carson while Tabitha covered the other 2 men. "What's in the sacks?" Jasper demanded, Carson's lip curled. Nothing that concerns you. Jasper nudged one sack with his boot, careful not to get too close. A distinct chemical smell wafted from it, arsenic, most likely, or some similar poison. Enough to kill every living thing in this creek for miles, he observed grimly. Just doing business, Carson said with a shrug. Nothing personal. It's personal to me, Tabitha replied, her voice hard. This is my land, my water. You are going to poison it, kill my livestock, possibly harm people downstream who depend on this creek. That's not business. That's criminal. Carson spat on the ground. Without proof, it's your word against mine. And in case you haven't noticed, I have friends in this territory. Important friends. Maybe, Jasper agreed. But I'm willing to bet the territorial governor wouldn't look kindly on someone poisoning a water source. That's the kind of thing that gets attention even from important friends. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Carson's face. Water rights were taken seriously in the territories, where access could mean life or death. Here's what's going to happen, Jasper continued, seeing his advantage. You and your men are going to mount up and ride out of here. You're going to leave Miss Abernathy and her ranch alone, permanently. Carson's eyes narrowed. Or what? Or I'll make it my personal mission to see you brought to justice. Jasper's voice was cold, implacable. I may not have a badge anymore, but I still have connections. People who would be very interested to hear about a man poisoning water sources to drive out landowners. The tension stretched between them, Carson clearly weighing his options. Finally, he jerked his head toward his men. Mount up. As they moved toward their horses, Carson turned back, his face twisted with malice. This isn't over, Blackwell. Not by a long shot. And you, Miss Abernathy, you'll regret choosing this side. There are other ways to get what I want. Any harm comes to Miss Abernathy or her property, Jasper said quietly, and you'll answer to me. That's a promise. Something in his tone, perhaps the absolute certainty with which he spoke, gave Carson pause. The man studied Jasper for a long moment, then mounted his horse without another word. With a final glare, he wheeled around and rode off into the darkness, his men following close behind. Jasper and Tabitha waited until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely before approaching the abandoned sacks. Jasper carefully examined them without touching the contents. Arsenic compound, he confirmed grimly. Enough to poison the creek for miles. We need to dispose of this safely, away from any water source. Tabitha's face was pale in the moonlight, but her voice was steady. We can bury it deep, far from the creek or any groundwater. I know a place. Together they carefully loaded the sacks onto Jasper's horse, which he'd tethered nearby, and followed Tabitha to a rocky outcropping far from the water. There they dug a deep hole and buried the poison, marking the spot with a cairn of stones as a warning. It was well past midnight by the time they returned to the ranch house, both exhausted but triumphant. They'd won this round at least. Carson had been stopped. You think he'll give up? Tabitha asked as they sat at her kitchen table, cups of hot coffee warming their hands. Jasper considered the question. Men like Carson don't give up easily, but they do recalculate when the odds change. He thought you were alone, vulnerable. Now he knows differently. Because of you, she said softly. Because you stood your ground, he corrected. I just helped even the odds a bit. Tabitha studied him over the rim of her cup. You're staying, aren't you, at least for a while? Jasper hadn't admitted it to himself until that moment, but he realized the decision had already been made. Montana could wait. Helena could wait. Right now, this fight, this place, this woman, they mattered more. Yes, he said simply, if you'll have me. Her smile was like sunrise after a long, dark night. I can't pay much, not at first, but there's plenty of work and a place to stay. I don't need much, Jasper replied. And it was true. After years of drifting, of carrying the burden of his past alone, the prospect of purpose, of belonging somewhere, even temporarily, was payment enough. "What about Montana?" she asked, as if reading his thoughts. "Your fresh start." Jasper looked around the small, comfortable kitchen, at the home Tabitha had fought so hard to protect. "Maybe fresh starts don't always have to be somewhere else," he said quietly. "Maybe sometimes they find you where you are." The weeks that followed brought a new rhythm to Jasper's life. By day, he and Tabitha worked side by side to maintain and improve the ranch. He repaired fences, tended livestock, and helped rebuild the chicken coop that had fallen into disrepair after her father's death. Tabitha, for her part, managed the household and kept meticulous records of the ranch's finances, proving herself a shrewd businesswoman as well as a capable rancher. Carson kept his distance, at least physically. But rumors reached them that he was still determined to acquire the Abernathy property, though his methods had shifted to more subtle tactics. He'd begun buying up neighboring properties, slowly surrounding Tabitha's land, cutting off traditional access routes that ranchers had used by custom if not by law. "He's trying to isolate us," Tabitha observed one evening as they studied a roughly drawn map of the area, marking properties Carson had reportedly acquired. "Make it so difficult to get supplies or move cattle that I'll have no choice but to sell." Jasper nodded grimly. "It's a common strategy. Less obvious than poisoning a creek, but effective in its own way." But Carson had underestimated both Tabitha's determination and Jasper's resourcefulness. Together, they forged new alliances with the few neighbors who had resisted Carson's offers. They established new routes for moving cattle and devised ways to be more self-sufficient, growing more of their own food and finding alternative sources for supplies they couldn't produce themselves. As summer gave way to fall, Jasper found himself thinking less and less about Montana. The restlessness that had driven him for years had quieted, replaced by a sense of purpose and belonging he hadn't felt since before the war. The Abernathy Ranch had become more than just a temporary stop on his journey. It had become something dangerously close to home. And Tabitha had become something he couldn't define, or perhaps was afraid to. They worked together, ate together, planned together. Their easy partnership had evolved into a friendship deeper than any Jasper had known. But there was something more there too, something that flickered in the quiet moments between them when their hands brushed as they passed tools, or when their eyes met across the dinner table, or during the long evenings when they sat on the porch watching the sunset, talking or simply sharing comfortable silence. On a crisp October afternoon, they rode out together to check on a section of fence that bordered one of Carson's newly acquired properties. The aspens had turned golden, their leaves shimmering in the autumn sunlight. The air was cool and clear, carrying the scent of pine from the distant hills. "It's beautiful here," Jasper remarked as they crested a rise that overlooked the valley. "I can see why your father chose this land." Tabitha smiled, her cheeks flushed from the ride. "He used to say that when God made the world, he saved the best parts for last, and this valley was one of them." She pointed to a distant ridge. "Up there is where he proposed to my mother. She was the daughter of a doctor in St. Louis, completely unsuited for frontier life, everyone said. But she came west with him anyway, helped him build this ranch from nothing." "She must have been quite a woman," Jasper observed. "She was. Strong, determined. Pa said I'm just like her." Tabitha's expression grew thoughtful. "Sometimes I wonder what she'd think of me now, fighting so hard for this place." "I think she'd be proud," Jasper said quietly. "Just as your father would be." Tabitha looked at him then, really looked at him, as if seeing something new in his face. "And what about you, Jasper? What do you think of all this? of staying to fight someone else's battle when you could be in Montana by now, starting that new life you planned. The question caught him off guard, though perhaps it shouldn't have. They never directly addressed his continued presence at the ranch, the way his few days had stretched into weeks and then months. "I think," he began, then paused, searching for words that wouldn't reveal too much of what he'd come to feel. "I think some battles are worth fighting, no matter whose they are, and some places." He looked across the valley at the ranch nestled below. "Some places get under your skin. And some people." Tabitha asked softly, her eyes never leaving his face. Jasper's heart hammered in his chest. This was dangerous territory, more perilous than any confrontation with Carson. He'd spent years building walls around himself, protecting himself from precisely this kind of vulnerability. "Some people," he acknowledged, his voice rough, "make a man reconsider everything he thought he knew about himself." The moment stretched between them, fraught with possibility. Tabitha's eyes were warm, inviting, but Jasper couldn't bring himself to bridge the gap. Not yet. There was still Carson to deal with, still the shadow of his past failures hanging over him. He didn't deserve her, didn't deserve this chance at happiness. "We should check that fence line," he said finally, breaking the tension. "Daylight's burning." If Tabitha was disappointed by his retreat, she didn't show it. With a nod, she turned her horse toward their destination, and Jasper followed, silently cursing his own cowardice. They found the fence intact, but noted fresh tracks along the property line, evidence that Carson's men had been patrolling the border, perhaps looking for vulnerabilities. As they worked their way back toward the ranch, the autumn sun began to set, casting long shadows across the landscape. "We should head back," Jasper suggested. "It'll be dark soon." Tabitha nodded agreement, but as they turned their horses homeward, the sharp crack of a rifle shot split the air. Jasper reacted instantly, leaping from his horse and pulling Tabitha down with him, sheltering behind a large boulder as another shot kicked up dirt near where they'd been standing. "Are you hit?" he asked urgently, scanning her for injuries. "No," she replied, her voice steady despite the danger. "Where did it come from?" Jasper peered carefully around the edge of the boulder. "That ridge to the north, sniper position." He drew his revolver. "Stay down." "What are you going to do?" Tabitha asked, reaching for her own weapon. "Draw their fire, see if I can spot them." Before she could protest, Jasper rolled to another position, exposing himself just enough to make himself a target while keeping his vital areas protected. Sure enough, another shot rang out, splintering bark from a tree just above his head. Jasper tracked the muzzle flash and returned fire, his shots more to keep the sniper's head down than with any real hope of hitting them at this distance. "I count at least 2 shooters," he told Tabitha as he rejoined her behind the boulder. "They've got the high ground and better weapons." "Carson's men," she said, her expression hardening. "He's escalated from threats to attempted murder." "Looks that way." Jasper checked his ammunition. "Our horses have scattered. We need to move to better cover before they decide to come down and finish the job." Tabitha nodded grimly. "There's a line shack about half a mile east of here. We could make it if we stay low and use the trees for cover." "Lead the way," Jasper replied. "I'll cover our retreat." Moving in a crouching run, they made their way through the gathering twilight toward the shack Tabitha had mentioned. Occasional shots followed them, but the increasing darkness and their careful use of cover kept them safe from the unseen attackers. The line shack was little more than a crude shelter used by cowhands during roundup, but its sturdy log walls offered protection from bullets as well as the elements. They slipped inside just as full darkness fell, Jasper barricading the door behind them while Tabitha checked the single window. "They'll have seen where we went," she said quietly. "It won't take them long to find us." Jasper nodded, quickly assessing their situation. The shack was defensible but small, just one room with basic furnishings. A small stove, a rough table and chair, and a narrow bunk. A lantern hung from a hook, which Tabitha lit, casting the interior in a warm glow. "We have the advantage of solid walls," Jasper observed, "but we're also trapped. If they surround us, our options are limited." Tabitha checked her rifle. "How many do you think there are?" "Hard to say. I spotted 2 shooters, but there could be more." Jasper moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. "They might wait until daylight when they can see better. Or they might try to flush us out tonight." As if in answer to his speculation, a voice called from the darkness outside. "Miss Abernathy, Mr. Blackwell, no need to make this harder than it has to be." Jasper recognized Carson's voice immediately. The man must have been nearby when the shooting started, ready to capitalize on the opportunity. "You've crossed a line, Carson," Jasper called back. "Attempted murder carries a heavy penalty, even in the territories." Carson's laugh floated through the night air. "Murder? No, sir. Just some warning shots to keep trespassers off my property. Dangerous misunderstanding, that's all. Could happen to anyone." "That wasn't your property, and you know it," Tabitha responded, her voice clear and strong despite the danger. "You're nothing but a common criminal, Carson." "Strong words from a woman in your position, Miss Abernathy." Carson's voice hardened. "I've been patient, made fair offers, but my patience has limits. This ends tonight one way or another." Jasper and Tabitha exchanged glances. Carson's ultimatum left little doubt about his intentions. "We need a plan," Tabitha whispered. "We can't just wait for them to make a move." Jasper nodded, thinking rapidly. "Does anyone know we rode out this way?" She shook her head. "No, we didn't tell anyone our plans. So no help is coming," Jasper concluded grimly. "We're on our own." Outside, they heard movement, men positioning themselves around the small shack, cutting off possible escape routes. Jasper counted at least 4 distinct voices, possibly more. The odds weren't in their favor. "We have until dawn," he said finally. "Carson won't risk attacking at night if he doesn't have to. Too easy for something to go wrong, too hard to control the situation. He'll wait for first light when they can see us clearly." "And then what?" Tabitha asked, her face pale in the lantern light. Jasper's expression was grim. "Then they'll try to force us out. Smoke, fire, whatever it takes. So we have a few hours," she said, thinking aloud. "How do we use them?" Jasper surveyed the small shack, looking for anything they could use to their advantage. His gaze fell on a loose floorboard near the back wall. Kneeling, he pried it up, revealing a small space beneath. "Does this continue under the whole shack?" he asked Tabitha. She joined him, peering into the darkness below. "Yes, there's a crawl space. Pa had all the line shacks built that way, raised off the ground to keep out moisture and critters. And possibly to provide an escape route," Jasper added, a plan beginning to form in his mind. "If we could create a distraction at dawn, one of us could slip out through the crawl space while the other covers from inside." Tabitha caught on quickly. "Whoever escapes could circle around behind Carson's men, even the odds a bit." "Exactly." Jasper replaced the floorboard, then moved back to the window to check their situation. He could make out dark shapes in the moonlight, Carson's men settling in for the night, confident in their advantage. "You should be the one to go," Tabitha said after a moment's consideration. "You're more experienced with this kind of fighting." Jasper shook his head. "No, you know the land better. You'll have a better chance of moving undetected and getting help if necessary." She looked like she wanted to argue but nodded instead. "All right, but what about you? You'll be facing them alone." "I've faced worse odds," he said, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. "All I need to do is keep them occupied long enough for you to circle around." They spent the next hour preparing as best they could. Jasper showed Tabitha how to move silently, how to use terrain to her advantage, how to approach from an enemy's blind spot. They checked and rechecked their weapons, counted ammunition, and discussed contingencies. As midnight approached, a strange calm settled over the shack. They had done all they could to prepare. Now they could only wait for dawn and the confrontation it would bring. Tabitha sat on the narrow bunk, her back against the wall, rifle across her knees. Jasper took the chair near the window, keeping watch on the dark shapes of Carson's men outside. "Jasper," Tabitha said softly after a long silence, "if something happens tomorrow, if things go wrong." He turned to look at her, his face half in shadow, half illuminated by the lantern's glow. "Nothing's going to go wrong, we have a good plan. But if it does," she persisted, "I need you to know that these past months, having you here," she hesitated, searching for words, "it's meant everything to me, not just because you've helped protect the ranch, but because—" "Tabitha," Jasper interrupted gently. Not now." She met his gaze unflinchingly. "If not now, when? Tomorrow isn't guaranteed for any of us, Jasper. You know that better than most." He did know. He'd seen too many men die with words unsaid, regrets unspoken. And yet, he couldn't bring himself to cross that final line, to admit what had been growing between them all these months. "I'm not the man you think I am," he said finally, his voice low. "What happened in Wyoming? It wasn't just bad luck or powerful enemies. I made mistakes. People got hurt because of me. Because I wasn't good enough, wasn't fast enough, wasn't smart enough." "That's not true," Tabitha countered firmly. "You did everything you could. You stood up for what was right, even when it cost you everything." Jasper shook his head, the old guilt washing over him. "You don't understand. I'm not. I'm not gentle, Tabitha. I'm not made for peaceful things. For homes and hearths and—" he broke off, unable to voice the word that hung between them. "I'm made for this," he gestured toward the window, toward the danger lurking in the darkness. "For fighting. For the hard edges of life." Tabitha stood, moving to kneel before him, her eyes level with his. "That's where you're wrong, Jasper Blackwell. I've seen who you really are. Not just the fighter, the protector. I've seen the man who fixes a broken fence with the same care he might mend a fine watch. The man who helped deliver a calf in the middle of the night and stayed up until dawn to make sure it would live. The man who taught me to shoot better, not because he enjoyed violence, but because he wanted me to be safe." She took his scarred hands in hers. "Those aren't the hands of someone made only for fighting. They're the hands of someone who knows how to build, how to nurture, how to care." Jasper looked down at their joined hands, his large and rough with calluses, hers smaller but equally work-hardened. They were the hands of people who had faced hardship, who knew what it meant to struggle and endure. "I'm afraid," he admitted, the words barely audible. "Not of Carson or his men. But of this, of you, of what I feel when I'm with you." "I'm afraid too," she whispered back. "But not of you, Jasper, never of you." She leaned forward, her intention clear in her eyes. Jasper knew he should pull away, maintain the distance he'd so carefully preserved. But in that moment, with dawn and danger approaching, he couldn't deny himself or her any longer. Their lips met in a kiss that was gentle at first, then deepened with months of unspoken longing. Jasper's hands found her waist, drawing her closer, while hers framed his face, fingers tracing the scar that had made others look away but had never bothered her. When they finally parted, both breathless, Jasper rested his forehead against hers. "If we survive tomorrow," he murmured, "we need to talk about this, about us, about what happens next." Tabitha smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen since the shooting began. "When we survive tomorrow," she corrected gently. "Not if." Her confidence steadied him, as it had so many times before. "When," he agreed, the corner of his mouth lifting in a rare smile. They stayed close as the night deepened around them, finding comfort in each other's presence as they prepared to face whatever the dawn would bring. The eastern sky had just begun to lighten when Jasper, who had dozed fitfully in the chair by the window, came fully alert. Outside, Carson's men were stirring, preparing for the confrontation ahead. It was time. He woke Tabitha with a gentle touch on her shoulder. She came awake instantly, years of ranch life having trained her to respond quickly. "It's time," Jasper said quietly. "They're getting ready." Tabitha nodded, fully alert despite the early hour. They moved quickly, implementing the plan they'd devised during the night. Jasper helped her slip through the opening in the floor while he prepared the distraction that would cover her escape. "Be careful," she whispered as she prepared to crawl under the shack and out the far side, where the approaching dawn still cast deep shadows. "You too," he replied, allowing himself one more moment of tenderness, brushing his fingers against her cheek. "I'll see you soon." With a final nod, she disappeared into the crawl space, moving silently as Jasper had taught her. He replaced the floorboard and moved to the window, watching as Carson and his men converged on the shack in the growing light. "Miss Abernathy, Mr. Blackwell," Carson called out. "Dawn's breaking. Time to end this standoff. Come out with your hands up and no one needs to get hurt." Jasper remained silent, waiting for Tabitha to have enough time to clear the shack and get into position. He counted slowly in his head, picturing her progress. "Last chance," Carson shouted, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Come out now or we'll burn you out." One of his men approached with a torch, ready to set the dry wood of the shack ablaze. It was time for Jasper's distraction. He fired a shot through the window, deliberately aiming high but close enough to scatter Carson's men to cover. "We're not coming out, Carson," he called. "But the sheriff and his deputies should be here any minute. They know exactly where we are and what you've done." It was a bluff, of course, but delivered with enough confidence to give Carson pause. The man wasn't a fool. Murder charges would hang him, powerful friends or not. "You're lying," Carson called back, but Jasper detected uncertainty in his voice. "No one knows you're here." "Are you willing to bet your life on that?" Jasper responded, firing another shot to keep the men pinned down. "Miss Abernathy sent word yesterday about your threats." Sheriffs had a posse ready all night. From the corner of his eye, Jasper caught movement. Tabitha, making her way around the perimeter, using the terrain for cover just as they'd planned. Carson's men, focused on the shack, hadn't spotted her yet. "Even if that's true," Carson said, his voice hardening, "they won't get here in time to save you." At his signal, his men opened fire on the shack, bullets splintering wood and smashing through the single window. Jasper dove for cover, returning fire carefully, conserving ammunition while maintaining the illusion that both he and Tabitha were still inside. The exchange of gunfire continued for several minutes, Jasper moving from position to position within the small shack to give the impression of two defenders. Outside, he could hear Carson directing his men to surround the building, cutting off any possible escape. Then, from the direction Tabitha had disappeared, a single rifle shot rang out. One of Carson's men cried out and fell. Before the others could react, another shot, another cry of pain. "We're surrounded," one of Carson's men shouted, panicking. "It's an ambush," Jasper smiled grimly. Tabitha had found her position and was making good use of it, sowing confusion among their attackers. He continued firing from inside the shack, carefully timing his shots to coordinate with hers, maximizing the impression of multiple assailants. Carson's men began to break, their confidence shattered by the unexpected resistance. Two fell back toward the tree line, seeking better cover. Carson himself remained, shouting orders that went unheeded as his men scattered, Taking advantage of the chaos, Jasper burst from the shack, gun blazing. He caught Carson exposed, the man's attention divided between his fleeing men and the unseen shooter who had ambushed them. "It's over, Carson," Jasper called, his revolver trained on the man's chest. "Drop your weapon." Carson froze, his eyes darting between Jasper and the trees where Tabitha's shots had come from. For a moment, Jasper thought he might surrender. Then Carson's face twisted with rage, and he swung his gun toward Jasper. Both men fired at the same moment. Jasper felt the burn as Carson's bullet grazed his shoulder, but his own shot was true, striking Carson in the chest. The man staggered, disbelief written across his features, then collapsed to the ground. "Jasper," Tabitha's voice called from the trees. "Are you hit?" "Just a graze," he replied, keeping his gun trained on Carson's still form. "Stay where you are. Make sure none of his men are still in position." He approached Carson cautiously, kicking the man's gun away before checking for signs of life. The wound was bad, possibly fatal without immediate medical attention, but Carson still clung to consciousness, his breathing ragged. "You should have killed me," Carson gasped, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. "Because if I live, I'll come back, finish what I started." Jasper looked down at him without pity. "No, Carson, you won't. Even if you survive, you'll face charges for attempted murder. No friends in high places can save you from that. Your days of terrorizing honest folks are over." Carson tried to respond but coughed instead, more blood staining his beard. His eyes fluttered, consciousness fading. Tabitha emerged from the trees, her rifle ready as she scanned for any remaining threats. Seeing none, she hurried to Jasper's side, her eyes widening at the sight of blood on his shoulder. "You are hit," she said accusingly. "Let me see." "It's nothing," he insisted, though he allowed her to examine the wound. "Just a graze. Carson got the worst of it." She glanced at the wounded man, her expression hard. "Will he live?" "Not without a doctor, and soon." Jasper looked around at the scattered bodies of Carson's men, some wounded, some perhaps dead. "We need to get back to the ranch, send for the sheriff and a doctor." Their horses had returned during the night, drawn by the familiar surroundings of the line shack. They secured Carson and the surviving members of his gang as best they could, using belts and bootlaces as makeshift restraints. Jasper helped Tabitha mount, his injured shoulder protesting the movement. "You're riding with me," she insisted, reaching down to help him up behind her. "That wound needs tending, and I don't trust you not to fall off your horse." Jasper wanted to object but found he lacked the energy. The adrenaline of the fight was wearing off, leaving him light-headed from blood loss and fatigue. Wordlessly, he swung up behind Tabitha, his good arm circling her waist for balance as she spurred the horse toward home. The ride back to the ranch was a blur for Jasper. He focused on staying upright, on the solid warmth of Tabitha before him, on the steady rhythm of the horse beneath them. By the time they reached the ranch house, his shirt was soaked with blood, and his vision had narrowed to a tunnel. "Stay with me, Jasper," Tabitha urged as she helped him dismount, her voice seeming to come from very far away. "Just a little longer," he nodded, or tried to, as she guided him into the house and onto a chair in the kitchen. With quick efficiency, she cut away his bloodied shirt to examine the wound. "It's not as bad as it looks," she declared after cleaning away enough blood to see clearly. "The bullet didn't lodge, it just tore through the flesh here." Her fingers probed gently near his shoulder. "But you've lost blood, and it needs stitching." Jasper watched through half-lidded eyes as she gathered supplies: needle, thread, bandages, a bottle of whiskey. Her movements were sure and practiced, reminding him that she'd grown up on a ranch where injuries were common and medical help often far away. "This will hurt," she warned, pouring whiskey over the wound. Jasper hissed at the burning pain but didn't flinch. "Not my first bullet," he managed through gritted teeth. "I'd be surprised if it was," she replied, threading the needle. "Try to hold still." Her stitches were neat and even, her touch gentle despite the necessary firmness of her work. Jasper found himself watching her face as she concentrated the slight furrow between her brows, the determined set of her jaw, the compassion in her eyes. "Why are you looking at me like that?" she asked, glancing up from her task. "Like what? Like—" She hesitated, cheeks coloring slightly. "Like I'm something special." "Because you are," Jasper replied simply, the words coming easily now, perhaps because of blood loss or the lingering effects of their brush with death. "You're the most remarkable woman I've ever known, Tabitha Abernathy." She finished the last stitch, tied it off, and reached for the bandages. "You're talking nonsense. It's the blood loss." "No," he said, catching her hand in his. "It's not nonsense, and you know it." Their eyes met and held. In the clear light of day, with the danger behind them, there was no hiding from what had grown between them over these months. "Jasper," she began, but he stopped her with a gentle squeeze of his hand. "Last night you asked me if not now. When do you remember?" She nodded, her eyes never leaving his. "I've been running for a long time," he continued. "From my past, from connection, from the possibility of happiness. I told myself I didn't deserve it, that I wasn't made for it." He took a deep breath. "But these months with you on this land, they've changed me. Or maybe they've just reminded me of who I really am, underneath all the scars and hard lessons." Tabitha's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "And who is that? Who is Jasper Blackwell, really?" He smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and softened the hard lines of his face. "A man who wants to stop running, a man who's found someone worth staying for." She sat beside him, her hand still in his. "What about Montana? Your fresh start?" "I started fresh the day I rode into Malad City and met the most stubborn, beautiful, courageous woman I've ever known," he replied. "Everything since has been unexpected, undeserved, but I'm not fool enough to walk away from it. Not anymore." A tear slipped down Tabitha's cheek. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying I love you, Tabitha Abernathy," Jasper declared, the words he'd held back for so long finally finding voice. "I love your strength, your determination, your kindness. I love the way you fight for what's yours, the way you see the good in people, even in a broken-down ex-lawman with too many regrets." He reached up with his good hand to brush away her tear. "I'm not an easy man. I've lived a hard life, made hard choices. I don't know if I can ever truly be the kind of man you deserve." His voice dropped lower, vulnerability showing through. "I'm too harsh for love, at least that's what I always told myself. But if you're willing to take a chance on me, I'd like to stay here with you for as long as you'll have me." Tabitha leaned into his touch, her eyes shining with emotion. "I've loved you for months, Jasper Blackwell. Watched you work this land like it was your own, protect me without asking anything in return." She turned her face to press a kiss to his palm. "You say you're too harsh for love, but I've seen the gentleness in you, the care you take with living things, the way you look at me when you think I don't notice." A smile touched her lips, radiant and hopeful. "Stay, Jasper, not as my hired hand, not as my protector. Stay as my partner in all things." "Are you proposing to me, Miss Abernathy?" Jasper asked, his own smile growing. "I believe I am, Mr. Blackwell," she replied, her cheeks flushing. "Though it's hardly conventional." "Nothing about us has been conventional from the start," he pointed out. He sobered slightly. "Are you sure, Tabitha? My past will always follow me, the things I've done, the enemies I've made." "I'm sure," she said firmly. "We've faced Carson together. We can face whatever else comes our way." Jasper's heart felt lighter than it had in years. "Then yes, I'll stay. As your partner in all things." Tabitha leaned forward, careful of his injured shoulder, and sealed their agreement with a kiss tender at first, then deepening with the promise of all they could be together. Later, after they'd sent a ranch hand from a neighboring property to fetch the sheriff and doctor, after they'd tended to their wounds and rested from their ordeal, they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the valley in gold and crimson. Jasper's arm was around Tabitha's shoulders, her head resting against him. "What happens now?" she asked softly. "Carson will face justice finally," Jasper replied. "With our testimony and the evidence of the ambush, even his friends won't be able to protect him. The other ranchers he intimidated might come forward too, now that they see he's not invincible." "I didn't mean about Carson," Tabitha clarified. "I meant about us, about the ranch." Jasper was quiet for a moment, considering. "I still need to write to my friend in Montana, tell him I won't be coming after all, and I suppose we should make things official, if you're still sure about wanting to tie your future to mine." Tabitha sat up to look at him directly. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." "Are you having doubts already?" "No," he assured her quickly. "No doubts, just adjusting to the idea that happiness might actually be possible. For me. With you," she smiled, the golden light of sunset haloing her hair. "It is possible. We've earned it, both of us." As darkness fell and the first stars appeared in the sky, they remained on the porch, planning their future together, the improvements they would make to the ranch, the cattle they would breed, the family they hoped to raise. The past still existed, but it no longer cast such a long shadow over Jasper's life. For the first time in years, he looked forward to tomorrow with hope instead of resignation. "Teach me gentle," he whispered against Tabitha's hair as she nestled closer to him. "I've known harshness all my life. Taught myself to be hard to survive, but with you I want to learn a different way." She turned her face up to his, love shining in her eyes. "We'll learn together, Jasper, every day." And in that moment, as they sat on the porch of the home they would share, Jasper Blackwell finally understood that his long journey had not been running away from his past, but running toward Tabitha, toward love, toward the man he was always meant to be. Over the next 5 years, the Abernathy Blackwell Ranch, as it came to be known throughout the county, flourished under their joint stewardship. Carson had indeed faced justice. His wounds had not been fatal, but they had left him partially paralyzed, a shadow of his former self. He had been tried and convicted of attempted murder, and served 3 years in the territorial prison before being released, a broken man who posed no further threat to anyone. With Carson's influence shattered, the other ranchers who had been intimidated into selling their land to him were able to reclaim their properties through legal channels. The web of power he had built collapsed, leaving the valley in more just and balanced hands. Jasper and Tabitha had married in a simple ceremony at the ranch, attended by neighbors and the few friends they had made in Malad City. The sheriff had stood as Jasper's best man, a friendship forged in the aftermath of Carson's arrest and strengthened by their shared commitment to justice. 2 years after their marriage, their son James was born, a sturdy boy with his mother's hazel eyes and his father's quiet intensity. The following year brought twin daughters, Sarah and Emma, whose laughter filled the ranch house and whose mischievous spirits kept their parents constantly on their toes. Jasper had indeed learned gentleness, as he had asked Tabitha to teach him. Not that he had ever truly been as harsh as he believed himself to be, but the softer emotions, tenderness, vulnerability, open affection had come slowly, nurtured by Tabitha's patient love and the unquestioning adoration of their children. On their 5th wedding anniversary, They sat on the same porch where they had planned their future, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set over the valley. James, nearly 3, was showing his 18-month-old sisters how to pet a newborn calf, his small face serious with responsibility. "He's just like you," Tabitha observed, leaning against Jasper's shoulder. "So careful, so protective." Jasper smiled, his arm tightening around her. "God help him." She laughed softly. "It's not such a bad thing being like his father. You're a good man, Jasper Blackwell, the best man I know." He kissed the top of her head, still amazed sometimes by the life they had built together. "Only because you saw something in me worth saving." "I saw you," she replied simply. "The real you, underneath all that gruffness and those scars. The man who would ride 500 miles to avoid entanglements but couldn't ride past a woman in trouble without stopping to help." Jasper watched his children, his heart full to bursting with love for them and for the woman beside him. The scar on his face had faded somewhat over the years, and the inner scars had healed too, thanks to Tabitha's love and the passage of time. "You ever regret it?" he asked suddenly. "Staying here, fighting for this land. We could have sold it after Carson was gone, moved somewhere easier, safer." Tabitha looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the sunset. "Not for a single moment. This land is part of us now, part of our children. It's their legacy, just as my father intended." She smiled. "Besides, when have you ever known me to choose the easy path?" Jasper chuckled. "Fair point. And you?" she asked. "Do you ever think about Montana, about the life you might have had there?" He shook his head without hesitation. "That life was just a dream, a way to keep moving forward when I had nothing else. This," he gestured to their home, their land, their children, "this is real. This is more than I ever dared hope for." "Papa," James called, running toward them with his sisters toddling behind. "Come see." "The calf is standing up." Jasper rose, lifting both girls into his arms as they reached the porch steps. "Is that so? Well, let's go have a look, shall we?" As he followed his son toward the barn, carrying his daughters securely in his strong arms, Jasper Blackwell reflected on the journey that had brought him here. The pain, the loss, the wandering, all of it had led him to Malad City, to Tabitha, to this moment of perfect contentment. He had once believed himself too harsh for love, too damaged by life's cruelties to deserve happiness. But Tabitha had taught him otherwise. She had shown him that gentleness was not weakness but strength of a different kind. That love was not a luxury but a necessity, as vital as water to the parched earth of his soul. And in learning gentleness, in allowing himself to love and be loved, Jasper Blackwell had found the peace that had eluded him for so long. Not in Montana, not in a badge or a gun, but here in the valley that had become his home, with the woman who had become his heart, and the children who were his future. He had stopped running, and in doing so, had finally found his way home.